Hello, everybody. So, I've been reading a lot of nonfiction books about those women in history who did amazing things. We just read the scientist book. They were all inventors. So, we've been reading a lot of nonfiction. So, I wanted to do a fictional story. It's a short story. And, well, it's actually a legend. It's spelled Legend. Legend. And a legend is something that maybe it's true, maybe it's not. It happened a long time ago, and people would tell the story over and over. And sometimes when you tell a story over and over, people change the story a little bit so that by the time we have it, it's hard to tell which parts of it really happened and which parts of it were made up. This is from a book that I got on my kindergarten graduation. It has lots of stories in it. It's called The Children's Book of Home and Family. And it has lots of different stories all through it, but I'm just going to read one of the stories. And this story, it starts right here on this side. It's called Penelope's Web. And there's the boat. That's the picture for this page. It says, "Here is one of the greatest homecoming stories ever told. Of all the heroes who fought against Troy, the wisest and shrewdest was Odysseus, king of the island country called Ithaca." So this is in the country of Greece a long time ago. And there was a war against a city called Troy, and there was a king, and his name was Odysseus. Odysseus did not want to go to war. He wanted to stay home with his wife Penelope and their baby Telemachus. But the princes of Greece demanded that he help them. "Go, Odysseus," said Penelope, his wife. "I will keep our son and the kingdom safe until you return." So Odysseus sailed away to the Trojan War. The whole time he was gone, he thought of little else except returning to Ithaca. He longed for the sight of his wife and son. 20 long years passed. Telemachus grew up to be a tall, strong young man. The war ended, and the other Greek heroes returned to their homes. But there was no sign of Odysseus. "His ship must be wrecked, and he must be dead, lying at the bottom of the sea," the people said. Penelope alone still hoped. "Odysseus is not dead," she insisted. Every day his seat was placed at the table for him, and his great bow, like a bow and arrow, was hung on the wall, and it was polished. How foolish of her. Here's the picture for the next page. This is Penelope, his wife. She's weaving something. Let's see. "How foolish of her," the Greek chiefs and princes said. "Everyone knows that Odysseus has gone for good. She should marry one of us." Soon the chiefs and princes began sailing to Ithaca, hoping to win Penelope's love. They were foolish fellows. "We have come as suitors for your hand," so that means they wanted to marry her. They told Penelope, "Odysseus is never coming home. Choose one of us." "Give me a while longer to wait for him," Penelope pleaded. She pointed to a loom that held a half-finished cloth. Its pattern was so rich and full of color it looked like a beautiful spider's web gleaming in the morning sun. "If Odysseus fails to return by the time I've finished weaving this cloth, I will choose one of you." So this, she's weaving right here. This is called a loom, and she's making this cloth down here. Okay. The suitors agreed and made themselves at home in the palace. They took the best of everything. They feasted every day in the great hall and helped themselves to the wine in the cellar. They were rude and insulting to the people of Ithaca. Every day Penelope sat at her loom and wove. "See how much I've added to the cloth," she would say. But at night, when the suitors were asleep, she took out all the threads she had woven during the day. That way, she was always at work, and the cloth was never finished. As the weeks passed, the suitors grew tired of waiting. One night, instead of going to sleep, one of them crept through the palace and peeped into the weaving room. There he saw Penelope busy unraveling the cloth by the light of a little lamp. The next morning, all the unwelcome guests knew the secret. "Fair queen," they said, "you are very cunning," that means smart, sneaky. "But we know what you're doing. Tomorrow you must choose one of us. We will wait no longer." The next day the suitors gathered in the great hall. They ate and drank and shouted so much that the timbers of the palace shook. While they were feasting, Telemachus, her son, came in and began to take down all the shields and swords that hung on the walls. "What are you doing with those weapons?" shouted the suitors. "They are dull with smoke and dust. They will keep much better in the treasure room," said Telemachus. "But I will leave my father's great bow, which hangs at the head of the hall. My mother polishes it every day and would miss it if it were gone." "She won't be polishing it much longer," the suitors laughed. "Before this day is over, Ithaca will have a new king." At that moment, a ragged, barefoot beggar entered the hall. "What do you want, old rags?" yelled the suitors. "Get out!" They hurled crusts of bread at his head. They stopped when they saw Penelope coming down the stairs, stately and beautiful, with her servants around her. "The queen! The queen!" cried the suitors. "She has come to choose one of us." At the bottom of this is the bow and arrow that is hanging on the wall. Let's see what happens. "Telemachus, my son," said Penelope, "what poor man is this?" This is the beggar who came in. "Mother, he is a wandering beggar who washed up on our shores last night," answered the prince. "Then he must have something to eat," said Penelope. All right, my phone rang because of something, so we're back to the story. Sorry about that. So there's a beggar. "He must have something to eat," said Penelope, "and when he has eaten, he can tell us the story." But the suitors who had gathered around the feast table started shouting again. "The beggar can tell us his tale tomorrow. It's time for you to choose a new husband. Choose now." "Chiefs and princes," Penelope said in a shaking voice, "let us leave this decision to the gods. Behold, there hangs the great bow of Odysseus. He was the only one who was able to string it. Let each of you try his strength in bending it. I will choose the one who can shoot an arrow from it most skillfully." "Well said," cried all the suitors, and they lined up to try their strength. The first took the huge bow in his hands, struggled to bend it, then threw it on the ground. "Only a giant could string a bow like that," he said. One by one, the suitors tried to string the bow, but all failed. "Maybe the old beggar would like to join the contest," they said, sneering. The ragged beggar rose from his seat and went with halting steps to the head of the hall. "Methinks," he said, "that in my younger days I once saw a bow like this." "Enough, enough," shouted the suitors. "Get out, you old fool." Suddenly a great change came over the stranger. Almost without effort he bent the great bow and strung it. Then he rose to his full height, and even in the beggar's rags he looked every inch a king. "Odysseus!" Penelope cried. "So he was able to bend the bow, and he's the king, Odysseus." The suitors were speechless. They looked for weapons, but Telemachus had taken all the shields and swords off the walls. In wildest alarm they turned and tried to escape from the halls. But the arrows of Odysseus were swift and sure, and not one missed its mark. "Now I avenge myself upon those who have tried to destroy my home," Odysseus cried. One after another, the lawless suitors perished. The next day, Odysseus sat beside Penelope and told her of his long wanderings over the sea. He told her how he had washed up on the shores of his own island, made himself known to Telemachus, and asked him to remove the weapons that hung in the great hall. Penelope in turn told him how she had faithfully kept the kingdom all those long years as she had promised, and even when the wicked suitors came. Then she brought from her chamber a roll of soft, gleaming cloth. "This is the cloth, Odysseus," she said. "I promised that on the day I finished it, I would choose a husband. It is done now, and I choose you." Odysseus was home at last. So there's Penelope giving the cloth to her husband, the king Odysseus. So that was our legend that I got to read for you guys today. My challenge is write your own story or your own legend. Maybe it'll involve kings and queens and princes and dragons, or maybe you'll want to write one about Vikings or ninjas or something like that. Write a story, send me a picture and then draw some pictures, write a book. I know a lot of you like to write books, so that would be something cool that you could do today, inspired by the legend of Penelopes Web that we read today. All right, see you guys next video. Bye.